The activist group Just Stop Oil has been protesting on the streets of London.
Climate protesters from Just Stop Oil have caused disruption.
Just Stop Oil, the latest incarnation of the eco...
Their behaviour is criminal, their behaviour is reckless.
Just Stop Oil activists are...
There's a kind of golden rule of protesting. Don't be a dick.
Do you think Just Stop Oil are terrorists?
We need to talk about Just Stop Oil. If you live in the southeast of the UK, the chances are Just Stop Oil have had some sort of impact on your life. This small but growing pressure group didn't exist a year ago. Just a few months on, they've generated a huge amount of headlines, comments, tweets, and shares. But they've also generated a lot of animosity, frustration, and anger from the general population. The question is, has it been worthwhile in the name of furthering their cause? Or has the public backlash meant their campaign is unwinnable? To answer that, we need to go back to the start. So who are Just Stop Oil? And why do we need to talk about them? It's impossible to ignore climate change. It's become the biggest threat to humanity around the world, with warmer and drier summers as well as wetter winters. In the UK alone, this has caused storms, floods, droughts and heat waves. The climate crisis is affecting us all. But this isn't a film about climate change. It's a film about protest. First things first, let's look at the roots of the group. Just Stop Oil was founded by Extinction Rebellion and their affiliate group, Insulate Britain. The two activist groups have made major headlines in the news since 2018 and describe themselves as a non-violent civil disobedience movement. Their main aim is to get governments to declare a climate and ecological emergency and take immediate action. But the methods by which they want to achieve that are controversial. In September 2021, Insulate Britain lay the foundations for the civil disobedience group, which has marred public life. They did something that had never been done before. They shut the M25. Fast forward to early February 2022 and Just Stop Oil was formed. Disillusionment of COP26 in Glasgow in late 2021, as well as the government's new decision to expand oil and gas production in the North Sea, quickly propelled them into action.
Working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet. Surely, working together, we are powerful enough to save it.
This is no longer a climate conference. This is now a global North Greenwash Festival.
Those commitments will be 100% useless if the promises made here are not followed up with real action.
Early on, in March, about 30 Just Stop Oil activists disrupted the BAFTAs event, targeting celebrities and urging them to use their platforms to speak out about the climate crisis. They also attempted to interrupt football matches at Premier League grounds, with one activist running onto the pitch at Goodison Park and cable tying himself to a goalpost by his neck. While these acts made the headlines in national newspapers, causing disruption at various events, they were deemed a minor nuisance. By April 2022, Just Stop Oil decided more action was needed. They changed their tactics and became increasingly disruptive to individuals and their way of life. In the following 8 months, their actions would make headlines throughout national newspapers and newsrooms and cause a huge amount of public animosity. The group started off by conducting countrywide blockades on various oil facilities, attempting to axe the petrol supply to the southeast of England and sabotaging petrol pumps at service stations on the M25. In the summer, they continued to block and vandalise petrol stations in central London, and in total staged around 32 days of disruption from the end of September to October. In parallel action to the petrol protests, other activists attempted to gain attention by targeting art. First, they glued themselves to the Hay Wain by John Constable at the National Gallery, and to Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper painting at the Royal Academy of Arts. While these forms of protest were not directly vandalising the art, they made maximum publicity when protesters threw a can of soup on one of Van Gogh's sunflower paintings at the National Gallery. Stopping traffic by gluing themselves to city roads, throwing orange paint at various public buildings, and smearing chocolate cake on King Charles's waxwork at Madame Tussauds were other forms of protest used in recent months. While these acts generated publicity, they still hadn't cut through to the mass public.
What are they achieving?
Well, what they're saying is they want maximum disruption to stop the government extracting oil and gas.
Yeah, but that's cooking oil.
Then, in November, all that changed. In a major escalation, some activists took to climbing the overhead gantries on the M25 at multiple locations and causing huge tailbacks and distress to commuters trying to make a living.
If we look at the last, 50 years since we first found out about the climate crisis, there have been people, campaigning, going on marches, standing on the sides of the roads with placards, signing petitions, writing to their MP, like non-disruptive forms of protest, but they haven't been listened to, they haven't worked.
This is Louise Harris. She went viral after filming a selfie on top of a gantry.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old, and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future.
The support of the kind of general public and the majority of people, it's not really kind of essential to what we're doing, because we're trying to achieve legislative change. So we don't need every single person in the UK to agree with us and to agree with what we're doing. It's about getting the government to act. It's not a popularity contest, and actually, even if it is the case that most of the general public hate us and are really angry at us, again, that is something that has happened in history as well. Like the suffragettes were incredibly unpopular at the time. They were hated. They were branded terrorists. In the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, he was the most hated man in America at the time.
Louise has become the face of Just Stop Oil's cause, and her passion is evident. But are they targeting the right people? During the M25 protests, normal travellers in cars, vans and lorries going about their daily business were held for hours while police removed the protesters. In one instance, a son missed his father's funeral, a patient had to delay life-saving cancer treatment, and millions of pounds was lost in GDP, much from small businesses operating in the southeast. The protesters have succeeded in generating headlines and a lot of social noise. These graphs showing tweets and Google searches for Just Stop Oil show a small bump during the art gallery protests in July. But the real spike comes in November, when the M25 protests began. But at what cost to their fundamental cause? A recent YouGov poll on the protest shows while 52% of the public polled sympathised with the stranded motorists, just 8% felt sympathy for Just Stop Oil activists. It's one thing to get talked about, but it's another to get the public on your side. So while their cause is for the good, is their way of protest winning hearts and minds, or are they turning off the supply for public sympathy? A 2017 Stanford University study into extreme protest tactics hit upon what they called the activist dilemma, where it shows that extreme tactics that raise awareness also have the major downside of reducing popular support. This is Mark McDermott, behavioural psychologist at the University of East London.
Are they winning minds, hearts and minds at the same time? That's the big issue. And what some of the evidence tends to show is that whilst disruptive action is good for getting the topic into the media, on the agenda, into people's minds, it's not particularly good at winning people's hearts. And actually, it does seem to decrease people's sense of identification with those groups and with the issues that, ironically, they're trying to have people feel more sympathetically towards.
Protest has, throughout history, been by its nature disruptive. When we look back, we often don't remember how people annoyed and enraged civilians, but we remember the change that was eventually made. But what has protest done for us lately, with smartphones and social media reaching millions more than a street protest ever would? Are Just Stop Oil productive in their tactics? Or are they merely creating theatre for social media? Just Stop Oil activists seem to be very much aware their actions are infuriating a lot of people. But they firmly believe no action will be taken by government if they do not protest by taking such measures.
We certainly need to escalate, because these kind of lesser forms of disruption haven't been listened to, which leaves us with kind of no choice but to just increase the disruption, increase the escalation, and hope that creates enough political pressure to force legislative change.
For now, their campaign to convince the government to ban all new fossil fuel projects continues. And so do their road protests. But could it end up being the public that Just Stop Oil?